Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I am Kathy Group. I'm the advertising manager, and I am going to be your host today. Today, we are sponsored by the South Coast Weavers and Spinners Guild in memory of Eva McCracken. I love it when the Guild remembers their own by doing something like this. Thank you, South Coast Weavers and Spinners. We appreciate you sponsoring Textiles and Tea. We will take questions as always, last 15 minutes. Please put your questions in the Q&A. Keep those chats coming. We love those, but I can't see the questions if it's in chat. Today, we have Tabitha Arnold. Tabitha makes labor-intensive art, as you will see. She studied painting at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. Then she transitioned into weaving and punch needle embroidery. Her meticulous tactile tapestries speak to the radical past and ongoing struggles that threads all working people together. She's inspired by the history of the labor movement, as well as her own direct experiences as a worker, organizer, and artist coming of age during a wave of unionization and class consciousness. Arnold's textiles are recently featured in Jacobin Magazine, Hyperallergic, and in this year's cover of the issue Dissent Magazine. She has completed residency in Glen Foerd in Philadelphia and Cortex Frontal in Portugal. In 2022, Tabitha was selected for the American Craft Council's Emerging Artist Cohort. She now lives and works in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Welcome, Tabitha. It's wonderful to have you here.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We appreciate you being with us today. We're going to start off with the important question, which is, what is your favorite tea?
My favorite tea is Earl Grey.
Really?
Yeah.
That's good.
I drink it with milk, which I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but that's what I do.
Well, it's the Tabitha way, and that's all that matters. So if you would share with us how you got started in your artistic career.
Yeah, so like you said, when you read my bio, I was a classically trained painter. So I had used the painting medium for my whole life, and I had drawn for my whole life, but painting especially was not clicking for me still by the time I got to college, but I decided to pursue it in school anyway, because I thought that I just needed to master it on an academic level, and then I would figure it out and enjoy it and sort of like open myself up as an artist. But and then one day in college, in my fourth year, so my last year, I went to see an Anne Hamilton exhibit at the Fabric Workshop in Philly, and part of the exhibit was that she had collected a bunch of samplers from different fiber techniques, sewing, embroidery, different types of needlework. And I was feeling nostalgic after that and a little bit curious about fiber art. So I just, I looked up how to weave on YouTube, and it was pretty much just history from there. I learned how to do it on my own and made a loom and everything.
So where did you go into doing the needle punch? Where did that start?
So punch needle was a few years later. I think maybe 2 years after I started weaving. I was getting into tapestry that was more representational looking, but I was getting frustrated with it at that point because tapestry is already a really time intensive medium, and getting a lot of detail, the level of detail that I wanted in tapestry was 10 times more difficult than the abstract type of weaving I had started with. So I found out about punch needle, and it just looked like the perfect way to combine what I liked about tapestry with embroidery, but it could also, it could work faster than embroidery. So that was a couple of years later.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're in school at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. You're making this switch now. And and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think Pennsylvania is still pretty a conservative art program. What was the reaction when you said, this is what I want to do? I don't want to paint. I want to do this.
Um, I think it was mixed, but overall positive. There were definitely some people who probably wrote me off as soon as I stopped painting and didn't care very much what I was doing. And I didn't win any kind of prizes or anything at our senior show. But also I think it was clear that I wasn't thriving with painting. And as soon as I switched to fiber, I think my work became more interesting right away. And that did lead to a lot more interesting conversations with other people at PAFA, my classmates and my professors. And I definitely had some mentors and teachers there who really supported me wanting to do fiber art. So yeah, I think it was undeniable that it was a better medium for me. So overall, I think people reacted to it well, but it was, unconventional, definitely.
Well, I give you kudos. It's kind of a brave thing to do. At that stage of your education and career, it's so easy to be overly influenced by the faculty and your advisors and all that. So good for you that you had the bravery, to stick with what you wanted to do. That's wonderful. I love that.
Thank you. It's very nice.
The fiber technique that you you use is normally made, and I'm not going to describe this well, but let me try. It's normally made so that there's loops in the front. It's kind of a fuzzy front part. But you have taken that and literally turned it around, and you do the back side is the front. Now, how did you come to appreciate the switch?
That was something I just liked from day one. Honestly, I figured out how to use punch needle the same as I was learning weaving, just from looking a little bit online, but mostly just trying it out on my own. And the first piece I did, I looked at the front when I was done, and I was like, oh, I thought this was going way better when I was looking at the back, because that's the side you look on. You look at the back while you're working on it. That's what you see.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, am I allowed to just keep it turned around? So I did. And so far, nobody has stopped me from doing that. So that's what I've always done.
Uh-huh. And we have another image because it's hard to see. And I was going to try to show this next image, which shows a close-up. The one on the left is the back and the one on the right is the front. And you can kind of see the texture on the right. But you really do get the detail on the left. It's amazing.
Yeah, so the left looks a lot like embroidery, and is basically just a faster way of doing an embroidery process, but also using yarn, which I think is more interesting in texture than embroidery thread would be.
It's so detailed. It's just amazing. And anybody who's done punch needle can appreciate this, that it's not that easy to do that detail and get that nice clean lines that you've done. Well, one of the themes in your work, and we talked about some of this in your introduction, is the labor movement as seen in this next piece called Workshop of the World. Why was that? If you can expand more upon that, what was it about that thing that spoke to you?
Yeah, so labor is a subject that I am just extremely into and passionate about. At the time that I moved from tapestry making to punch needle embroidery, I was becoming really involved in local political work in Philly, where I was living. I was working at a cafe, and I was trying to form a union at my cafe, and also I was trying to help other service industry workers in the city do the same at their job. And I remember feeling very frustrated at that time because there was not a lot of artwork about labor or imagery that really directly expressed the theme of the labor movement or the topic of unions. So I wanted something to fill that void. If that conversation wasn't really going on, I wanted to help start it. Yeah, so I had a lot of feelings, a lot of thoughts about the labor movement and about it being important and wanting to share that with people. And I just noticed that as I started to use those ideas in punch needle tapestry, I just noticed that people reacted to this medium, and it definitely elicited a response from others in real life and on the internet, and got people's attention. And I thought it would be a good platform to kind of get conversations going and disseminate my thoughts and opinions that I wanted to share.
So were you doing that theme when you were painting also, or was it the switch to fiber was coincided with the theme of labor?
Yeah, I didn't really make political work at all when I was painting. I didn't really have a political awareness at all, I would say, until I was a little bit older. When I was learning to weave was like fall of 2016. So Trump was getting elected that fall. It was a very politically polarized time in Philly, and I had gotten really interested in the Bernie Sanders campaign and wanted to learn more about politics and turn my attention to local politics after that. So I was getting engaged in those ideas, where before, when I was painting, I didn't really have any kind of political theme I would want to attach to my work.
When this next piece is called Whose Streets, and it shows a beautiful use of color. They all do, but I want to talk about this piece. The intensity of your colors are wonderful. The deep reds, the vibrant yellow oranges. So do your colors play into your work? I mean, do like the colors have meaning? Like, I'm going to use this color for this image because it goes along with this, or just talk some about color usage and what it means for you.
Yeah. So fiber art is, I would say that's where I figured out how to use color. When I was painting, I always felt very frustrated with color usage because I felt like I had too many options. Like it was just too limitless to be able to mix any color. And I would have ideas of what I wanted to make, and then I would end up mixing this like brown mud on my palette because I'm also just like impulsive and messy as a person. So yarn overall, in a lot of ways, was better for me. It feels like picking a limited palette, and it's so much easier for me to organize colors when I have them as yarn than as paint. And I think of it more as building and combining them together and playing with how you can get sort of an optical effect of color mixing when you're doing threads that are layered and alternating. So yeah, I have fun with color when I do fiber art, and it's much more clear and understandable to me. But I would say overall, when I'm choosing colors for a piece, that's just an emotional decision, or it's intuitive. So I wouldn't say that one color might symbolize something in particular, but I do think that when I'm thinking about the imagery, I have an intuitive idea of what color I want to use, and I'm just following that. So it's more of like a playing around, fun kind of feeling based decision.
Well, what was there a learning curve for you when I don't know how much fiber you were doing before you went to off to Pennsylvania Academy, but was there a learning curve for you of we're going to get some help on this answer, a learning curve for you for the learning how colors work in yarn, or the working with yarn in general?
Yeah, well, as far as color, I think I understood a lot about color from having a classical education. Like I
Right.
understood how to use complementary colors and contrast. And I had this formal education, like I wouldn't say it's not something I use every day. I think I still use so many of the tenets of painting, and I
Mhm.
really benefit from that education. But I just couldn't like express it with paint for some reason. But yeah, and learning about yarn that was definitely a learning curve. In the beginning, I could not even tell the difference between different types of yarn. Like
Mhm.
I was kind of using whatever. And I remember my friend telling me at one point, I gave her a bunch of my yarn and I was teaching her how to weave, and she was like, I don't like the feel of acrylic yarn in my hands. It feels all staticky and irritating. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it took me a while to even be able to understand the difference between yarns and what gauge of yarn I like to use and what material. But through trial and error, I think I've definitely found some of my favorites and what works best for my style of work. So, and
Mhm.
now that would be definitely really liking wool and liking hand dyed, and often naturally dyed types of wool yarn.
Yeah, I think everybody listening is going, oh yeah, went through that. You first start, it's just yarn, and then trying to figure out, oh, that's
Yeah.
different than this. And
And then
yeah,
learning that all the yarn I like is 5 times as expensive as
exactly.
the other
Why
yarn.
can't I like the cheap yarn?
Yeah.
Right. Um, when you, I saw in an interview, I thought this was pretty brave on your part. In an interview, you said your work's propaganda. Would you talk about that? Not a lot of people will be willing to say that. I thought that was great.
Yeah. When I started making political work, I wanted to uplift a certain perspective of a working class person, and I wanted to
Mhm.
make a very positive case for unions. So I wanted my work to have a clear bias or be presenting an ideological view of like I think the labor movement is good. I think um the labor movement should achieve and has to achieve like a certain um it has to win we have to win these campaigns, we have to get power as a working class. So I wanted to present these in a not a vague light, but a very intentional presenting that perspective. And part of that was just because I felt very overwhelmed when I started making political work about labor by propaganda from the other side,
Hmm.
which is like, I don't even know if people would recognize capitalist propaganda for what it is because we're not used to calling it that. But there's just this dominant narrative that's still pretty strong, but has been very strong in the recent past of how, like, for example, that a service industry worker, like what I was doing, doesn't deserve to make a living wage because the work they do isn't skilled enough. Like that, I would call that capitalist propaganda. But people don't really call it that. And then the ideas of like bootstrapping, that you would have to work your way out of the kind of individual problems you have instead of recognizing that there is a systemic problem and you should work with other people to collectively overcome problems. Like that is propaganda. So I wanted to recognize that and make my own work that was an answer to that.
Oh,
um
okay.
yeah, and kind of not see propaganda making as inherently negative. Just I think if you're being transparent about it and being clear about your values, I think that's a good thing to do. So yeah, I wanted to affirm the world I want to see and the perspective that I think um is important to see represented in the art world, where there wasn't a ton of explicitly pro union or pro labor work
going on previously. I like that you said that propaganda isn't necessarily a negative thing. I think that's a word that has kind of gotten that negative connotation. So that's a good point of when you're looking at that. Well, many of the choices in your work are about content and meaning as opposed to art aesthetics. Would that be true? Or like in women's work, and I chose this just because I love it. I think it's beautiful. But I also thought it was a wonderful balance of the visual with the symbolic. So how do you find that balance for yourself?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty 50-50 for me in terms of whether I'm making a decision because of the imagery and the meaning, or because I think it's aesthetically interesting.
Mhm.
So in this piece, this is a good example. This is actually a commission that I did for a friend who is a labor organizer, and she was specifically interested in, she gave me like a whole list of the exact things she wanted to see in the piece. So there was like the I'm really blanking on the name right now. There's a specific working class women's textile movement. I want to say it's Lewisburg or no, I think it's Lowell was the city that it was in. But there's a specific textile workers strike that she wanted me to represent.
Okay.
Imagery from Philly and from New Orleans, where she had lived. And she wanted a fat-bodied woman to be represented in the piece. So she was like, she knew exactly what she wanted, and she knew exactly the colors that she wanted. So she gave me palette ideas. So this is me working from that inspiration, but I usually work from the bottom up, and the piece, I don't always have an idea of exactly what the piece needs or what it's going to look like as a finished product. I will start at the bottom and kind of make decisions based on, it could be either that I need this image or this symbol to be represented, or it could be like, I need a shape here to balance out this shape, or I need a color here to complement this color. So I think a lot of the content can either start from an aesthetic or a representational symbolic place. But eventually they kind of come together, and once we get to the top, we have usually a pretty maximalist image with a lot going on. So I need to stop my dogs from wrestling because they're going to make a lot of noise. Hey. They're mostly good.
They know. Mom's on the TV, so mom's on Zoom. Let's misbehave.
Yeah.
One thing I was curious about, because I could look at this piece forever, and the more I look at it, the more I see things or I interpret things. So how do you feel about people looking at your work and not knowing what it means? Like if this was hanging in a gallery, would you want to list next to it that this means this means that? Or are you okay with people kind of projecting onto something what it means?
I am always against the explaining what exactly everything means approach, because I just think like it could mean something totally different to someone else than what I even intended. And I think that's part of the point. So I would never want to constrain someone else's understanding of my work. I think in general, I really want my work to be something people can understand and relate to. I want it to be really legible, and I want them to see things in it that they feel like they understand. I'm not trying to make it opaque or mysterious. So hopefully people can find at least one thing that they understand, but it's okay with me if there are some mysterious elements. Basically, I'd rather it like start a conversation where they ask me and we talk about it than me explain what everything is. Like it bothers me when someone is just points at things and is like, and what's that? And what's that? Like I would, I try to avoid doing that.
Well, I have to admit I was too. It's like, ooh, what's that white thing? I wonder what that means. And oh, look at that. I wonder what that means. It's very, and it draws you in. You just want to look at it and learn it and read it. And I just love how her hair becomes something else too. It's just a beautiful piece. I'm so glad you shared it with us.
Thank you.
This next image is called titled Picket, and it has many of these pieces are just like the one we looked at. They're so full of different images. And what I've done here is I've taken one corner, the upper right corner, and blown it up a little bit, because what struck me about this is that the little piece on the right could almost stand on its own. And I'd asked you about that because I just thought it was amazing how it's kind of, I don't want to say the cliche that it's a sum of the parts, but kind of like that. I mean, any of these images could just, if I took that corner, it could stand by itself. If I just took the image in the middle, it could stand by itself. And I didn't know if that is what you're striving for, it's what you want, or it's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah, I want my work to be maximalist. I would say that's an aesthetic that I really like. I've always liked, like in music, I like when artists do like a rock opera or like a really long, complicated song with a ton of lyrics. Like, I just think it's so interesting when there's a lot, because I think the concepts I'm trying to express are big and complicated, and it's hard to express all the things I'm thinking about without just having a lot going on. And I think what happens with the pieces is, as I add more and more of these smaller pieces and attempts to kind of explain or represent different aspects of the general theme, once I get to the top and once it's finished, I think that it is able to kind of like go even further and express even more than I originally was thinking about. Kind of like what I just said for the last question of like how people bring their own interpretations to it. Like, I just basically want to present a ton of things for people to interpret, and then hopefully at some point one or many of these little images will succeed in the goal of communicating what I want it to communicate, which in this case is like, this piece is about a picket line or a strike, and kind of like showing it as a religious experience and how being in solidarity with other people can transform you, and all the different kind of elements that make up being in a working class movement, all the different jobs and the places in the streets where this kind of thing happens. So yeah, I like when there's a lot going on. I like Byzantine icons. I was looking at those a lot for this piece because they will also have a general theme, but then just have like a lot of tiny little scenes of little vignettes and stories.
Well, one thing I thought of when I was looking is this, and I was thinking about the labor movement, is that the labor movement is about individuals, but at the same time, it's about the whole. You know, that, like you said earlier, is that you pull together and you can make a difference. But it's also about the guy or woman that goes home at the end of the day with that paycheck. And I was thinking about that also, is that, you know, the guys on strike are that's one group, and these are a group, but they're also all working together, hopefully for a better outcome.
Yeah, that's a great interpretation. That is what I would like people to think of.
You have found this balance in producing. One thing I want to go back up and say is that you also try to make a living with your work. Some artists just make art and they don't care if they sell it or not. I know that you do produce and sell online, and people go to your website, they'll see that. So how do you find the balance between producing a piece that reflects you as an artist, balance that with producing a piece that's marketable? Or is that an issue at all?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Because I found it's kind of contradictory, where if I try to make work that I think other people will like,
Mm-hmm.
if I have in my mind, like, okay, people need to like this and think it's good, it's usually a flop and nobody likes it. So what I found is I think people like it the most when I do something that I feel like is risky. So I usually know that I'm making a good piece when I'm not liking it about midway through, when I'm like, this sucks and everyone's gonna hate it. That's usually a good sign. Because I think it is like the risk taking and pushing yourself into a kind of scary area that ends up creating something that's good, and people can sense that if it's more authentic. And I think people are attracted to that rather than what might feel like pandering to them or trying to market to them or get them to spend money, which feels inauthentic. So yeah, I found that contradiction a lot, and when I lean into that, that is how I usually can get that balance, I guess, is try to go into a risky area and do things that feel vulnerable, and try to stay pretty authentic to what I'm interested in and what I think is important. But I also do look at like what people have responded to in the past positively. So I kind of understand like that people like my work because they like certain political themes, or yeah, I kind of know what they might like to see next. So that might be the balance of like, I should still make work about the labor movement and unions, but I also sometimes want to make a piece about like something really random and weird, like I don't know.
Random
Insane.
and weird is good. I like that.
I wanted to make one about Insane Clown Posse, which is that like Juggalo, the Juggalo band, when they have the huge gathering of all the Juggalos. I thought that'd be such an interesting piece, but it'd be really off theme, so that might be far off of the beat to be marketable.
Well, when you have time, and this is also often an issue for people who are using their artwork as part of their income, is that when you have time to just make art for you, art for art's sake, one, do you get to do that? And two, what do you like to do?
Yeah, I've never felt like I can really do visual art for fun. Like I don't even like doodling or drawing for fun. I find it stressful to just try to have fun with that. So that medium, I don't really do it for art's sake. If I want to just be creative and relax, I think normally my outlet for that would be cooking or making costumes or just general like fashion and outfits. And then I'm trying to learn piano. So that's my other for fun creative thing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of comments about your shirt. Everybody wants to know about your shirt.
Well, it's a shirt.
Somebody said it looked Egyptian.
Yeah, it's some sort of dice print. I don't know.
So what's next for you? What's next on your agenda?
Well, this Friday, I'm going to go to Sag Harbor to the church where I had an exhibit last summer and do a really quick printmaking residency with them, and then do a quick monoprinting workshop. So that'll be a fun, super near future thing. But after that, I am pretty much just settling into living in Chattanooga. I've lived here for 2 months, so I'm still very new. and I'm just kind of trying to explore the South, which has a very different relationship to unions than Philly. But definitely still has a super interesting political atmosphere. So I've been enjoying like exploring the history of Tennessee and Chattanooga and figuring out what people are up to here and, where things are headed for us. So, yeah.
Well, when you said Sag Harbor, now, is that where that YouTube video is from?
Yeah, that's where I had the interview in August.
Okay. Yeah, I encourage you all to YouTube, excuse me, Tabitha's name, and it'll come up. And she did a lovely talk at was it the opening of the exhibit?
It wasn't the opening. It was just one of their programming things. We just had an artist Q&A. It was toward the end.
Yeah, it was great. If you all want to learn more about Tabitha's work, I encourage you to go to YouTube, put in her name, and you'll see this talk come up that was interesting. It really, Tabitha, you did a lovely job of talking more about your work and what it means for you. So I encourage you all to do that. All right, we've got bunches of questions. Shall we take some?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this is an interesting question. Way back at the beginning of this, Sandra's wanted to know, why was looking at textile samples nostalgic for you?
Oh, I mean, definitely women in my family have always done needlework, not as art so much as just craft or even just practical need. So like when I was born and when my siblings were born, my grandma made us like samplers with our names and birth date and picture of our house. So like, yeah, my grandma definitely did lots of needlework stuff, and my mom would like sew cushions and curtains and things. So it was kind of around and something I think I dabbled in as a kid, but didn't get that good at. So abandoned it until I was an adult. So yeah, I guess just like I was nostalgic for that like childhood of being surrounded by needlework.
I was thinking this too. This is from Anne Marie Miller. Were you influenced at all by Diego Rivera's work as it relates to labor?
Yeah, I would say I knew about Diego Rivera, but not really anything about his politics. I think that often gets washed out completely of like our education about him and about Frida Kahlo. Like their political beliefs are completely removed by the time you learn about them. And then when right after I graduated, I went on a trip to Bulgaria because I had a friend there and you could fly there round trip for like $500 or something. So, and when I was there, I saw a lot of Soviet murals and mosaics, which were a direct inspiration to the Mexican communist muralists. So since like becoming interested in those, then I became interested in Mexican murals and a lot of different communist art around the world. So long answer, yes, but I kind of like feel like I got there in a backwards way.
How do you start your designs? Do you draw or use pictures? And then later on somebody says, do you use a cartoon?
I will do drawings sometimes, but like I said, I don't really plan it all out ahead of time. So I'll sometimes do a general drawing of the composition and then maybe sketch out a few ideas as I go, but it's usually not very tight or detailed. And I don't I don't stencil really, but I will usually just take a marker and draw on the backing before I outline it with thread. And I'll sometimes draw lines, sort of like a grid, to help me keep things pretty square because I like to have things on lines.
Well, Janet Frank wants to know what kind and size of yarn do you use with punch needle?
So lately I've been using the punch needle in size, I think it's 14. It's the mini size. And so with that one, I can usually do DK weight to worsted weight. So kind of anything on that spectrum.
Karen LeBlanc wants to know, can you talk about your finishing technique? Some pieces have a French effect while others don't. And how do you decide how to finish a piece? Great question.
Yeah, so I kind of have 3 binding or edge methods I'll go to. Sometimes I will just do a whip stitch border. That was the first thing I learned how to do. And then if I think it needs tassels or a fringe, I will tie those on after I whip stitch it. But it's really just a decision that I make based on the piece. Like if I think it needs that or it suits it, like the edges, I think it's the last thing, and I kind of just look at what I have and think what might work best. And then the third thing I do, which I've been doing more lately, is just gluing the edge with no border. So that's a little bit more like sculpture looking and less rug looking when I finish it that way.
Yeah, I noticed a couple of those pieces, they weren't exactly square, and that you kind of sculpted the corners of them.
Yeah, with the binding with whip stitch, it can become really tricky when you have an irregular edge. So gluing has been good for just not worrying about that stuff.
Several people mentioned Lowell, Massachusetts, because you were talking about Lowell earlier, and that was a hotbed for textiles many years ago. So, and even in the chat, they put some information about Lowell and the museum there and everything.
Good. Okay.
A couple of people wanted to know about size of your pieces. And I know the one piece we showed that was hanging between 2 columns, I wanted to show that to give an idea of size for that piece. Are all the pieces about that size, or do you vary?
Oh, they vary a lot. So that one is one of the biggest ones I've made. The biggest I've done is basically like standard door frame size. So like 72 inches high and then like 40 something inches wide I've done 3, I think, that size. And then I've done a bunch of them about 3 by 5 feet roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've done as small as like 1 by 1.5 feet. So it's really, I prefer to make them larger, but then I can't, then it obviously takes forever. So sometimes I'll just do a smaller one because I want to do a concept that I don't think I have a million ideas for that I could make into a giant piece.
Well, Sandra Tellerico, Sandra, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. She says, I want one of those pieces. And it's like, Sandra, we can probably make that happen. I bet if you contact Tabitha, she can make that happen. Do you sell off of your website?
Yeah, so, well, I don't sell off my website directly. I do have a contact page with my email, and if people email me, I'll send them my price list for a finished piece. I also have an Etsy where you can buy prints. So I sell $20 prints of a lot of my textile pieces, and those have been really popular because I got some really nice photographs done of them. And
let me interrupt you for a second here. Would you talk more about that? Because I was going to ask that question, and there's just too much to ask. You got to choose. But those prints have significance for you, right? They're not just prints. You didn't just choose to do prints because, oh, that'd be cool. Doesn't that, because I think I heard you talk about how you want your art to be affordable.
Yeah, well, that's like a big conundrum of textile art that takes so
Right.
long, is that the amount of hours I spend on it, if I'm paying myself a decent amount, then I end up with something that I could never sell to basically anyone I know, or um, you know, like people who work jobs like can't usually spend several $1,000s on a piece of art. So that's been tough. And one way I've been able to share my work is with prints. So it's a nice compromise that if somebody can't buy a full piece, then they can have a print of it in their home. And that's worked really well. And I've been glad that I can share pieces that way.
I like that. It's like you walk your walk, you know. You don't just have the theory, you live the theory. I appreciate that. That's great. I appreciate you letting us know about that too.
Yeah.
Deborah Pringle wants to know, your compositions remind me of Egyptian friezes. Have you been influenced by Egyptian bas reliefs? Good question.
Yeah, I've looked a little bit at Egyptian art. Yeah, I would say a little bit of it is I definitely will use some of the kind of row like structure in my work, and
Mhm.
that is sort of related to Egyptian art, but also just a lot of ancient art forms kind of have that style that I'm emulating. So I look at a lot of ancient textile, like Bayeux tapestry would be one good example of that. And yeah, I like the narrative power of ancient art because it is trying to communicate ideas without words.
Mhm. It's true. So true. Well, speaking of repetition, Beth Wrench wants to know, repetition is very heavily used in your tapestries. Do you ever have problems getting motifs lined up horizontally when they appear around a larger center motif? Because your work is nice, beautiful construction. I mean, it's not kind of wobbly. So how do you do that? Do you have problems with that structure?
Um, it can be a little tricky, but like I said before, I usually just draw on it with a marker. So I'll make myself sort of a grid, and if I've made a figure, I'll draw a line from the top of the figure's head, and I'll know where to lay out the next figure. So there's sort of like an underdrawing process sometimes before I get into the punch needle part.
Beth Bailey says, is there another type of textile art that you would like to explore? Yeah, I was curious, are you weaving at all, or are you just, is that not part of your time now?
I'm pretty much done with weaving at the moment. I just it was really fun when I liked doing abstract work, but it's just not good for the representational stuff right now, at least on like a hand tapestry loom. And there are definitely weavers who use a floor loom to make incredibly detailed representational images. I just don't really have that set up at the moment. I would love to learn quilt, but I did try and I was not good at it. It's more important to be precise and measure in quilting, or at least in the traditional style. And I wasn't good at that. I mean, I would love to learn more now that I'm closer to Alabama. I'm hoping to go and visit the Gee's Bend quilters, and I know that their style is a lot more kind of avant-garde and more about piecing together what you have than following a really rigid structure. So maybe I could do that type. But yeah, love to learn quilting. Um, and I'd like to learn how to sew clothes as well.
Well, Joy, who either used to live or does live in Chattanooga, says, have you been to Highlander in New Market, Tennessee? This place was the first near Chattanooga and trained labor organizers. Later, Highlander was the place that Rosa Parks was trained prior to her refusal to move to the back of the bus. Highlander is still a place for organizers to gather and always include artists and musicians. Thank you for that history, Joy.
Yeah, I've heard of Highlander, but I have not been. So that is definitely something I'll have to check out.
Sorry, I got to scroll through here real quick. One thing I was curious about, and I forgot to mention it when we were looking at it, I apologize. The pieces that were, I think they were called Workshops of the World, that were hanging between the two columns. The one thing I wanted to mention about that was that there was like, not a tear, but an opening in that work. Is that something that you do often? Was there a specific reason for it in that piece, or?
Yeah, that was something I started doing during that residency. So I made those pieces for Glen Foerd, where I had a residency, and part of the decision was because I wanted to go in a more sculptural direction, and I was a bit frustrated with my work looking too much like a painting, so just like a flat square wall hanging object. So to make it sculptural, I wanted to add more holes and play with negative space a little bit more within the piece. And also I thought it'd be interesting. I was looking at these church doors for inspiration at this church near Glen Foerd, where a lot of the workers who I was researching for the piece had attended during the industrial era, and the church doors had cutouts in them, and I looked at that and I was like, well, I can also use that in my piece. And then I liked it because they kind of hang like gates as you're going in through a passageway or hallway in the estate. And when you look at them, you can also see details of the estate through the piece at the same time as you look at the artwork itself. So I thought that was interesting.
Oh, Jill Carrick says, I'm also a weaver and a punch rug artist. Thank you, HGA, for having Tabitha's art featured. She says she uses yarn scraps from weaving and knitting for her punch rug. And you may have answered this, but I'm going to ask it again. Do you primarily use wool now?
Yeah, I use almost all wool at this point. It just, I think it's the best color and the texture is really nice.
Now, you talked some about the natural dyes. Is that something that you do now, or you think you might do, is take up the dyeing to get the colors you want?
Yeah, that's another thing maybe eventually I would like to learn how to do, but I kind of also just like getting them pre-dyed, because then it becomes, it's kind of like I said, where I don't really want to mix my own color. I find it more interesting to find something and then to work with what I have. And yeah, like yarn buying or yarn acquiring from different places is like part of the process that's fun. I don't think, I might not even want to make the colors myself, because I like the element of chance or randomness.
Well, you do a wonderful job of taking what you have and making it work together. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I can't believe it, but I think we're done for the day. It's been a great hour. I appreciate you being on here.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
And I look forward to seeing some of your work. Chattanooga's not that far away. I hope I'll be seeing some of your work. Are you looking to do an exhibit anytime soon? Or I know some artists, just interviewed somebody the other day that said, I don't want to do exhibits. You know, they just want to make art. So
yeah, I would like to do exhibits. I'm always looking for them. So if anyone has one, definitely let me know. But coming up, let's see, I'm gonna do this thing next month. I don't even know if this is worth plugging, because I'm gonna do a talk that's only 5 minutes at Arraiolos, which is a little event we have here in Chattanooga. I guess it's this month, actually. I think it's November 18th. So I'm gonna do a 5-minute talk. I have work that's going to be in Portugal in April. So if you're in Portugal, you can check it out. It's going to be in Évora for the month of April.
Is that where you did your residency?
I did it nearby, but it's with the residency program is having a show, this group show. And then it's sort of the long-term thing I'm working toward is I'm going to have my first solo show in 2024. That's going to be at Swarthmore College, which is in the Philly suburbs.
Yeah.
So January 2024. Put that on your calendar. That's
well, let us know. Make sure you let HGA know about that. We want to make sure we promote it and get it in our calendar and in the magazine.
Definitely. That'd be great.
That'd be wonderful. Well, Tabitha, thank you so much. We do appreciate you being here. And I do want to remind people again, go to Tabitha's website. It's tabithaarnold.com. And you can see more of her work. Like she said, if you're interested in something, you can email her and you can work that out. But it does have more of her images and more about Tabitha herself. I do want to thank Tabitha for being here, but I also want to thank the sponsor. Today, it was South Coast Weavers and Spinners in memory of Eva McCracken. There's more information about Eva in the chat if you're interested. Again, I kudos to the Guild to take steps to remember their own. I think that's a lovely, lovely gesture. I appreciate you doing that. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, if you want to, your business or your guild, you can do that by going to weavespindye.org, and there's more information there about becoming a sponsor. If you, just a reminder that the sponsorships that we get for Textiles and Tea and for through the Fiber Trust, they promote these programs that we do, whether it was Spinning and Weaving Week, Textiles and Tea, Career in Textiles. All these programs that we have throughout the year is sponsored and paid for by your donations, either through the Fiber Trust or through sponsoring Textiles and Tea and other sponsorships. So thank you for all of you who have sponsored. And if you're interested, please contact us at weavespindye.org. One other thing you can do, I had someone give me a check the other day saying, I want you guys to make that thermometer full. If you would like to join in our little celebration of 100 episodes of Textiles and Tea, I know I keep saying this, but it's just amazing that we've gone this far. It will be November 29th. It is Sheila Hicks. The great Sheila Hicks is going to be on the show. I'm so excited. But if you would like to donate, we're trying to do 100 donations of $100 in celebration of 100 episodes. And again, you can just go online and donate at weavespindye.org. We are at 79. Woohoo! We're almost there. We look forward to getting to 100 by November the 29th. And next week, we have Donna Foley is going to be our guest. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, Tabitha, for sharing with us. Love seeing these new and upcoming artists. Thank you for sharing your work with us and more about yourself and where you come from on your artwork. We appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you. All right, you guys have a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday, Donna Foley. And remember, happy tea.